one thing is clear: the Torah is subservience to God, and it's very, very clear that Zionism has no place in the Jewish life or in the Jewish teachings.
Zionism, it became an even darker. Yes, yes.
Zionism came and transformed, turned over the essence of a Jew.
Palestinians must be killed. Men, women, and infants. Hello everybody. Zionist. It's a term that to describe the people who are supporting the state of Israel. They are not just supporting the state of Israel. They are supporting the Zionism ideology, which is establishing a Jewish state on a vacant land. That means the ethnic cleansing of the people who are not Jewish and establishing a Jewish state. In this documentary film, I wanted to explain more about the Zionism ideology. Since Zionist ideology revolves around the idea of creating a Jewish state, and the Zionist declaration that Judaism and Zionism are one and the same. The ideology of Zionism has been linked to Judaism, and the misidentification of all Jews as Zionist became the dominant discourse around the world. Understanding the ideology of Zionism and its connection to Judaism is going to provide a lot of answers to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict right now. However, the most important thing is we're going to understand how Jewish people themselves became the victim of Zionists. Rabbi Weiss, good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I thought you'd go inside.
No, it's okay actually. The weather is okay.
I was halfway here, and somebody called me to do something. I figured he didn't call me. He said 2:30, so maybe you missed it, because usually it's exacting the timing. So I went to pick somebody else up, and then you called me, and I was already stuck in the traffic.
No worries.
Sorry.
No worries at all.
And if not, then tomorrow, let me ask you something. Is there some way, because they're supposed to give me an answer today still about another event that I have to go to, that's why I'm not sure. And they promised me today or tomorrow. But if not, then I could just take a chance for tomorrow morning. There's mamish no tickets left beside this, in other words. So we try to stand with everything, for Palestine. Here's the, look, here was a big school, an anti-Zionist school. It doesn't say names on it. You can just take a picture. It's a very, it's quite a large. It's anti-Zionist, totally anti-Zionist. Their mentor, the teacher, was not that these little children met him, but was Rabbi Teitelbaum, chief rabbi of Palestine. There's tens and hundreds of thousands of others of us students in schools we have. They're anti-Zionist, and he was the greatest mentor, and like the grand rabbi. He was the chief rabbi of Palestine, moved to the United States, and so many of us are branches, and students who open schools and so forth. On the other side of the road, I didn't show you yesterday. I showed you was another school that was also two schools actually. one actually my grandchildren learn in a school that we passed on the one side. And then there was another one that was from another rabbi, a great rabbi from Europe. His name was Rabbi Shapiro. His name was Chaim Elazar Shapiro, blessed memory. And he was before the Second World War, maybe arguably, he was the most vocal opposer of Zionism in Europe. He was a tremendously big scholar, made many books, author of many law books and books on every facet of the Torah. He was a great man, and the world, recognized him as a leader, and he was one of the staunchest opposer of Zionism. My father actually, of blessed memory, had gone and was a follower of this Rabbi Shapiro. So we passed actually one of the schools on this on the side, and that I pointed out to you yesterday was actually students of his, and maybe his grandchildren made a school. So in Monsey, there's a branch here. It's only a branch because there's a New York, there's other schools of his, and so forth. Thank God, being that this is a very religious suburban area, so there's many followers, and many private schools of anti-Zionist schools, and separate. They're all totally separate boys and girls schools. So these are all Jewish areas. You can see there's another school right over here. That's just, this school is not a direct. It's not a Zionist school. No Zionist things, and they're opposing Zionism, but just not a very vocal school. But it's an anti-Zionist school basically. Right over here is going to be built another big school. Some of my grandchildren live study in this school that's going to be here. It's a different school, also anti-Zionist school. There was a great holy man, also an anti-Zionist, considered himself a follower also of Rabbi Teitelbaum, a very holy man from Russia, and they made a school in memory of his name. Just one second, I'm sorry. Hello? Oh, okay, ich darf gut geriefen, weil ich darf aufpicken dann Seite jetzt. Okay. Ich bin jetzt herangefunden in deinem Driveway direkt. Ein Minute, die darfst du nehmen deine Sachen? No Israeli flags. Almost you can count on your hand in the whole miles and miles and miles around how many Israeli flags you find. And almost entirely there's not any school. I don't know if there's a school at all that has an Israeli flag, because even the ones that aren't vocal against Zionism, but in essence the religious communities are not Zionist. Because we explained, we keep on explaining that it's contradictory. The whole concept of Zionism is really totally antithetical, contradictory, and diametrically opposite of Judaism. It defies the laws of the Torah, defies the concept of the ideology of the belief in God, that God protects us, that and that we put our trust in God. And Zionism says, where's God to protect us? We have to have a land. So it's rooted in atheism, and rooted in blasphemy, in heresy. And it flies in the laws of the Torah, because the Torah tells us that we are in exile since the destruction of the temple, and that we are not in any manner, shape, or form. We are forbidden to make our own entity, our own sovereignty. So this is a basic issue of the Torah, and not have a state. with the help of the Almighty, first I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His truth, and so sanctifying His name and bringing peace to the world. And thank you for making this interview happen, because we feel it's a godly obligation to educate the world on the truth of what this issue of Zionism is, and that it does not represent Judaism. We feel it's crucial both to sanctify God's name, both to be able to, that the world should be able to stand up and with God's help stop this in its tracks, Zionism, hopefully with God's help speedily and peacefully. Really, I will defer to Rabbi Beck in the differences even of Judaism and Zionism, because basically he'll delve into the ideological points and the fine points. So I'll let them. But as very short and concise, Zionism is truly the nemesis of Judaism. It's the most diametric opposite of what it could mean to be a Jew. Judaism is belief, subservience to God, throwing one's hope and asking for the protection from God, accepting that the Almighty rules the world and it's His will, and we have to follow His will, and only He can protect us. And Zionism refutes all of that. They consider themselves proudly a democracy, or something that you don't have to practice religion, and that you don't, and that God is not protecting. There's no God, or there is where was God in history, and where was God by the Second World War, and so forth. So it's rooted in heresy and blasphemy. In its actions, it ignores all the laws of the Torah, this Zionist state of Israel. It ignores the laws that we are not to steal or kill or oppress a people. It ignores the fact that we are required to show gratitude to people who have done good to us. It's a very, very stringent requirement. This and the Torah is replete with stories of how the Jews were required to show gratitude where they went, where they traveled, to the nations, even when they went up from Egypt to the Holy Land. The nations that had provided food for them was always supposed to be to show gratitude to them, and many such stories. And even Moses, it says, when God told by that he was the 10 plagues that God punished Egypt with. So the first plague was the water should turn into blood, and God said to Moses that he should smite the water with his staff, with his stick, that walking stick, and with the stand, and it would turn into blood. And Moses said that there's a story that Pharaoh bathed in Jewish blood. He would slaughter children. So Moses' mother, when he was born, and his sister, they hid him in a basket, a wicker basket, amongst the reeds in the water. And he said, the water protected me. How could I smite the water? And therefore, so he referred to his brother. He referred to Aaron, his brother, to hit the water, that it should turn into blood. And this we teach our children. This is the basics of Torah, that even for an object like water, we have to show gratitude to. So certainly, most certainly, human beings and so forth. So I mean, this is the basics of Torah. And Zionism totally ignores the hundreds of years that Jews found a safe haven in the Arab and Muslim lands, and they basically, in Zionism, in every facet, they breach, and one of the most and very, very crucial and one of the root issues here is that the Torah, since the destruction of the temple, we were put under oath by God, the destruction of King Solomon's temple 2,000 years ago, that we are not to attempt to recreate the sovereignty. We are not. We were put under 3 oaths not to return en masse to the Holy Land. in large numbers. We are not, as individuals, people will allow the Jewish people to live there with the permission of the governing body, but not to return en masse and not to create our own sovereignty, any part of the world. We are, secondly, we are not to rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens and pray for the well-being of the nations that we're residing in. Thirdly, not to make any attempt to exile. So even this would be, if it wouldn't affect, it would be a desolate, uninhabited land. We are not to have our own sovereignty. And the state of Israel breaches every facet of this. They bring people up en masse. They attempt to bring up Jews from all the corners of the earth to come up, create this, to have this state. They, of course, rebel against the indigenous population. And they consider that, they call themselves the end of exile, although they don't even believe in exile, many of them, and so forth. But they use this concept. They say to be able to ensnare many Jews. They say we are the end of exile. So
actually, I want to ask you a question about about this. Do you think the majority of the Jewish people who emigrated to Palestine or to the state of Israel right now, they did this for the sake of Judaism?
No. So certainly, first of all, the majority, unfortunately, of Jews are non-religious,
and in Israel,
in around the world,
okay.
And therefore, and the Zionists, what they sold this idea, and what they tried to get people to come up and join to join them is so there's many who are not religious at all, so they're not doing it for this purpose, but really it has a history. You have to understand, when the Zionism started, they were a small movement, of course, and then later with the mass movement, a lot of it was because they manipulated by the Second World War that Jews, including Rabbi Beck, we can talk about that, like the many Jews who they really closed the doors. They worked with other countries that they should not allow them to come to them. They should not take them in. They manipulated that they should go to Palestine, and therefore so the community grew. So there was many Jewish people who are believers in the Torah, who are religious, but they didn't go up because they wanted to support the Zionist ideology or dream. So there was many issues here that we'll get into. But basically, I just wanted, before I will introduce Rabbi Beck, the concept, I'm saying that Zionism the concept of having a state is totally forbidden. And for 2,000 years, Jews respected this edict, this oath of God, and we didn't make a state, never made our own state. And many responses, that means rabbinical writing, told people, Jewish people, that we should have patience and God is protecting us. Of course, we wait ultimately for a metaphysical change in the world where all humanity will recognize the one God. We believe that a miracle will one day occur, and then it will be all humanity will join arms. There will not be any more atheists, and we will all go up and serve God, and God will recreate Jerusalem and a temple, which will be the will of all humanity. But if I have to convince you about it, then it means that it's not happening, that it's the wrong, that it's a false rebuilding or whatever. In other words, what will happen is never a threat to any other people who don't agree with us, because we say we're not doing anything. It will be a will of all humanity when God, it will be a godly spirit which everybody will agree to. So if you accept my belief or don't, but it's neither here nor there. That's why we were never a threat for Muslim countries. But basically, so Zionism breaches all the Jewish laws that is an issue between the Jewish people and God of remaining in exile, and the issues that have to pertain to one human being to another, and not to kill and not to steal, because they've oppressed and banished and the whole Palestinian nation. So in every facet, Zionism is totally the opposite. And in its thought, it comes behind the idea. So it's totally the opposite, totally contradictory to Judaism. Yet, of course, the Zionist state uses the name Israel. They've taken all the Jewish symbols, they've hijacked it, and they're using it and misrepresenting us. And now, to get a little more in depth and to get a more fine-tuned issue, Rabbi Beck.
Yes.
So I will listen in the Machshuva, the Chiluk, Zionis and Yiddishkeit. Und wie soll es die Welt, das ist ungenehm, es ist nicht, die Menschen sind aufgegangen, sie haben als Zioinen sind aufgegangen, sie wussten, und es ist getauscht auch die Zeiten.
Ich will
Rabbi Beck would like to make a few preface this with a thought or something with what he's going to say.
We sit and
He's asking you to put your mind to what he has to say, because
Nacht Mother said, "You look the Drusha speech. They has been waiting the matzah."
Yes. Yesterday, Rabbi Beck gave a little of a speech, he says, or whatever, about what the situation is. And he was asked to give a short, brief explanation. Is it gedort? And it took an hour and 3/4 around. He says he can't help himself. He can't, and that's his manner of talking. He can't do it in any other way, like very, very short. Yeah. First, I'd say two parables.
Maße, de machshuvas, en Weiss, in de maße, de tolles, in de machshuvas, very tolles.
In a book called Chinuch, that's a codifier, sort of the Jewish laws, brings that there's two things. There's the thought behind the thought, and the actual deed. That when a person does something, there's the thought behind it and the deed. So he said the thought is considered like the father, and the deed is the action that emanates, whatever, is considered like the child. That's what it's referred to. As a parable to that. So somebody comes and he decides to build a house. So he had set his mind to build a house. And they start building, and they set it up way when a person builds a house. You bring all the necessary supplies and so forth. And in the middle of his building, he changes his mind that he wants to make a factory here. So all of a sudden, you see one day the bulldozers come and they rake up everything, and they make big holes in everything. I'm saying, what happened here? All that changed was a thought. The thought seems so simple. He just changed the thought, but that thought brought to a tremendous change.
The Yiddish called is gebot of a minne. The alt, the minne in the minne is alt. 3.500 Jahre, 3 Schutz gegeben auf dem Berg Sinai. Und auf dem ist alles gebot. Die alle Poldes, wenn das Galle geworden beim Klal Yisroel, ist auf dem gebot.
The Jewish belief, the Jewish religion is built on belief in God. All the laws and everything that came and that was revealed to the Jewish people through the time is all on this concept of belief in God.
Alle Shiniyim, alle Yunim, wo sind Donnerregeln auf dem Klal Yisroel, ist alles gebot und Minne.
Everything, all the changes and anything that goes through with the Jewish history is built on one thing, and that's belief in God.
Klal Yisroel hat vermuckt. Es staan hinderte Tausender Gedäule Yisroel. Gewaltige Riesen.
The Jewish religion, Jewish people, the Jewish nation had amongst them most probably hundreds of thousands of brilliant scholars, of tremendously great scholars throughout the ages.
Und wir vermogen zähnliche Tausender Spuren.
And we have amongst us tens of thousands of books. Beside the ones that have already, been that disappeared, that we don't have them anymore, that were either destroyed or whatever. But we have amongst us still today tens of thousands of books.
The ganze System von Klal Yisroel ist ein Hemmschicht in der Friedige. Dieselbe Sache, ein Hemmschicht in der Friedige.
The system of Judaism from today is simply like a link in a chain of a continuation of the religion that was till now.
Zionism is out 150 years.
Zionism is around 150 years old. But I left out one word he said before, and this belief that started was around 3,500 years ago. What we took on Mount Sinai, this covenant that we made with God.
Wir sehen, auf dem Zionismus baut sich verschiedene Sachen, bis es umgekommen zu dem Matze, was die zionistische Medina mit den ganzen Keursachen, mit alles Ding, hat sich entwickelt bis Hand. In the 150 years.
Zionism was an ideology that started building different things, came from it until it made a state of Israel, and it evolved to what it is today. All of this is 150 years.
Die Shiniyim sind eine gewaltige Größe, von überall, von vor den 150 Jahren bis nach dem. Der Klal Yisroel, die ganze, was geht durch auf dem Klal Yisroel, und andere Sorte Maße, andere Sorte Jungen, bis sie beginnen, der Hemmschicht in Berg Sinai, bis Zion.
This is
andere Sorte Binyonim, andere Sorte, was vor dem sind die alle Sachen nicht gewesen.
Till 150 years ago, Judaism went in its path. From the last 150 years, there was a tremendous change that went over the Jewish nation, let's call it, around the world with this development of Zionism.
Was ist geschehen?
What happened here?
Was ist geschehen mit dem Klal Yisroel?
What happened to this Klal Yisroel, the nation of Israel, the Jewish nation?
Die Machshuve hat sich gebiet.
The thought has changed. The thought process changed.
Also mit der friedige Muschel von einem Binyan.
Like the example of building a building. So in other words, therefore the whole world, the Jewish world, is in a tumult. It's
the andere Machshuve,
because it's another thought process, and on this another thought process is building this building.
In der Paar, Zionism. Wenn Zionism in der Robe gekommen ist gewesen eine Größe, ist Nagdes, eine Größe Milchume, in alle, Kimat alle Gdeulen Yisroel, in seine Eides, seine Jiden.
And therefore, when Zionism started, there was a big war, let us say. I'm not talking about physical war, and sometimes it had to that, but it was a war from almost the entire Jewish leadership, scholars. When we talk leadership, it means the rabbis, they're great scholars, and their followers, all, almost in its entirety, around the world opposed this concept of Zionism.
And also, Zionism darf verleihen große Keuches heranzukommen, der Gedanke soll herankommen in Klal Yisroel.
It took, the Zionists had to put in a tremendous amount of pressure and different things in order to be able to breach this barrier, to be able to come in amongst the Jewish nation.
Wegen zwei Sachen. Eins, was du sagst, Yesod ist die Überband von der Machshuve, von Pnimius, von Klal Yisroel, auf dem Heppich von dem.
Because of two reasons. One is because it's a fundamental change in the thought process of what this is.
Die zweite, weil wir umgetroffen haben, starke Milchume.
And secondly, simply because they met with a tremendous amount of opposition
Von der Rabbunen und von allen ehrlichen Jiden.
from the rabbis and from the God-fearing Jewish community.
In der Fall, wir können fragen, Schale. Die Klal Yisroel ist in Gules. In het betreed op een kop van Klal Yisroel. Ze gaat het door schwieriges doen. Nu, de pushen, de cycle van een mens, die beweegt zich een schale, Lass dich nicht. Aber tritt auf den Kopf, lass dich nicht. Wie viel Zeichel darf man zu dem holen?
Yeah, and because really, you can ask a question asks naturally. The Jewish people have gone through a lot of trials and tribulations, a lot of suffering, a lot of persecution. So how much logic does it take for a person to say, well, let's not let ourselves, let's create, let's not let ourselves, let's do something to oppose this.
The Teretz is, die größte Chochme, was Zionism hat aufgetroffen, was gebaut auf dem Gedanke, ist nicht bloß ein Gedanke. Das ist ein Change, ein gesäudiger Change in den ganzen Indien von Claudius.
And so, and this is truly what Zionism is. This concept of not letting ourselves this is what it's predicated, what's built on Zionism. And so it's not just a thought of we're not going to let ourselves. This is rooted in a whole change of what it means to be a Jew, the ideology of Judaism.
In der Fall of Zionism gemisst unter sich starke Tricks.
And therefore Zionism had to come on to a tremendous amount, a lot of manipulation, false, like misconstruing and trickery. In order that it should be able to go into the thought, the thought process, the way of thinking of the Jewish people.
Tricks.
What are these tricks that they use?
Zwei Sorten Tricks. Ein Trick, zum Gebalde der Klal Yisroel, ist verbinden mit Eretz Yisroel. Mit einem starken Bind. Wo ist der Bind? Der Teure, der Bind. Wenn es nur Mitzvahs in der Teure, muss man verbinden mit Eretz Yisroel.
Yeah.
In jedem halten die Mitzvahs.
Yeah,
haben sie gefunden, verneidig aufzubauen, sein Gedanke in dem Platz.
Yeah. The two tricks, two things.
Noch ein, der zweite habe ich noch nicht gesagt.
One is the Jewish people are bound spiritually with the Holy Land, meaning with concepts of commandments that we have that we have certain commandments that pertain to the Holy Land. Ich gesucht keine Machshuva sein gebinden mit der. Ich gesucht zwei Sachen Mitzvahs Trias Bruder.
Ja, in der Machshuva.
And thought in the Holy Land. Darf Masbam was meint mit Machshuva. We'll explain what that means, these thoughts, but and commandments certain that pertain only to the Holy Land, which we'll all speak about. For instance, giving certain charities go of fruits that grow from the Holy Land. In other lands, you don't have to take off on a percent. But anything that grows in the Holy Land, like a tenth of it has to be given to charity. There's many laws that pertain to the Holy Land, but also the thought process of a Jew has to explain.
Der Kesher in jedem Eretz Yisroel, das wir uns jetzt, dass so stark ist, kein politischer Gedanke, bechlall nicht.
This bond that the Jewish people have to the Holy Land is totally not at all in any manner a political attachment to the Holy Land.
Bloß der Inyan von Kedisha.
And solely the issue of holiness and spirituality.
Lois le Moifes. Die ganze Menschheit von Weiss Scheini, Kimat, nicht die ganze, Kimat, ist gewesen unter andere Völkerherrschaft.
And just a proof of this is that there were two temples, it happens to be, that King Solomon built and it was destroyed, and they built another temple, and it was for hundreds of years. And almost its entire period, the Jewish people were under the rulership of other nations. They weren't under their own rulership. They had the temple, they lived there, but they paid taxes, and they were under the auspices, under the rulership of other nations, Greece and so forth. First it was under Persia, and then it was under Greece. Right. Right. And then after it was under the Rome. And as long as they let the Jews practice their religion, the Jews didn't have any complaints.
Wenn sie in der Chashmonim aufgestanden, wenn die Juden haben gestellt, der Jüdischkeit. Sie liebt die Jüdischkeit.
Yeah. Later, there was a very famous the holiday by Jews. It's a famous time. It's called the Holiday of Lights. It's referred to in English, which we call Hanukkah. And right, yes, and that is the holiday of we celebrate the Maccabees, which the Zionists used that name for their Olympic team. But Maccabees was a group of the children of the high priest by the Second Temple that stood up and rebelled against the Greek rulership. Why did they rebel? They were hundreds of years under the Greek rulership, and it wasn't a problem. Or as long as the period of the Greek rulership was at that time. But they rebelled because the Greeks all of a sudden gave out a decree that if one circumcises their child or keeps Shabbos, the Sabbath, keeps the Sabbath, which is by us the Ten Commandments and all and so forth, that if we will keep it was punishable by death. When they did this, when they gave this decree, then the holy the high priest and his children stood up and said, we will rebel, and they had a miracle. God saved them. But we, by the way, just as an off that Rabbi Beck is not saying this, so it was a miraculous happening that God saved us, and that's why we celebrate with the holiday of lights. We light candles to celebrate that we were able to light the candles in the temple, or whatever. That was a miracle. They found oil to light the candles. We don't celebrate in a manner showing swords or something like that. And the miracle was totally a miraculous happening, because it was like few old men, like Rabbi, older men like Rabbi Beck, and the people, they were the high priest and his children against hundreds of thousands of the Greek, the empire that was ruling on the world, and they were able to be victorious. Why? Because it was a miracle of God's will, not to gain physical rules. It was simply to break off this that they refuted. Yeah.
Noch eine Erscheinung in der Zeit von der Persie hat Moshe gewesen, Yisroel, ist gewesen bis Mikdash ein Bild von Shishon Abire, mit gesagt, der Malchus hat es gefordert, hat keinem nicht gebaut.
Another example.
Sie zeigen, also
Right. Another example to show that this concept that our attachment to the Holy Land is not a physical issue, is that when it was under the Persians, the rulership, which also we're talking about the Second Temple, so they had in the temple there was a big there was a picture of Shushan, which was of Persia. That was the capital of Persia at the time. And it was in the temple was a command of the requirement of the king or whatever in Persia, and rule of Persia, and that it happened, and it didn't bother anybody. It wasn't a problem having that.
In der Chashmon aufgestanden, die Ball damals schon mit der Politikal gewesen, die Juden. Mit Meile haben sie gehabt schon auch da.
When afterwards, when they had given the decree that we can't keep the Jewish commandments, and the Jewish people revolted against that, so then automatically afterwards they had already broken the rule of the Greeks, and they had their own kings afterwards. But the actual war that was started not because of a physical issue of being under another rulership, it was because of the attempt to stop the Jewish practice, the practice of Jewish religion.
Das ist gedauert lang, in Zürich hintergefallen, hinter die römische Herrschaft. Ist sie weiter alles gegangen.
It didn't take very long, unfortunately, and then that was and the Romans took over afterwards, and the Jews were under the Romans, but they didn't, and it was still okay. It wasn't a problem.
Then gekommen
Baryonim,
ja, sie kamen die Baryonim. Es haben beide all gewesen, nicht mit der. Es haben beide all gewesen von der Jebunen, als politische Sache.
Jebunen,
nicht mit der Römer. Es geworden der Chart mit der ganzen Macht.
Yeah. Then a group of Jewish people called the Baryonim, that was the name of them, and they stood up and rebelled and revolted against the Romans, against the will of the rabbis,
So the rabbis did not want them to rebuild.
exactly.
So those, like a bunch of people who tried to just
Right, and there's whole
This,
stories in the Talmud about that the rabbis tried to sent out a message to the head of Rome and so forth, to the heads of the general there. They snuck somebody out, the rabbi in a coffin, that they should be. There's whole stories that they should be able. Right, and so this was because they were opposed to this. And then and at the end of the day they were not successful. The Baryonim, they lost and they went back under the Romans.
Der zionistische Gedanke ist bloß ein politischer.
The Zionist concept, what they want, is pure a political movement.
Die Zionisten, wenn unheimlich sein Plan, haben sie viele nicht gewollt in Eretz Yisroel, sie wollten machen dieselbe Sache in Uganda.
And the Zionists, their goal was, and their plan was not even to make it in the Holy Land, in Palestine. They wanted to make it in Uganda or on andere Plätze, Patagonia, Rochester, New York, or whatever. They had many other plans.
Narvos. Man zum Masbel gewähnt, als kein Schimmplatz wird nicht können bewegen dem Jiden, dem Klal Yisroel, Zigeiner Jiden. Danke der Fall, weil sie eine fremde Machschuwe, eine jesoidesdige Immerbatim von der Machschuwe, was der Klal Yisroel hat in der Sache nicht kein Interesse.
But people explain to them, supporters of them, that it won't be successful only if they go to the Holy Land because of this fact, because it's seeing that it's such a tremendous change of what the Jewish people's thought process and so forth. What that they will never have success. They will not be able to gain the support and the sympathy and backing unless they go to the Holy Land and build it on some Jewish concepts.
Warum sie genommen Eretz Yisroel? Sie haben genutzt die Verbindungs mit Klal Yisroel, mit Koyach Kedisha, mit Koyach dem Mitzvahs HaToyle, haben das genutzt auf seine Change, auf seine Auszunutzen der Gefühl von Jeden, mit Koyach Eretz Yisroel, soll man akzeptieren seinen neuen Plan.
So what they did, they went to the Holy Land and they used this attachment that Jews have because of spirituality, because of holiness to the land. They used this, manipulated to use it to be able to build and embellish their connection, to be able to transform it for their political issue of Zionism. And to change the thought process, but they use a totally other concept, the connections that Jews have, the spirituality.
Sie sind gegangen von Eretz Yisroel, Yechidem, Asach Yechidem, Bechlal nicht mit dem Gedanken von einem politischen Gedanken, nach bloß Avodas Hashem.
When?
Menschen von den ganzen Jahren von Gules, sie sind in Yechidem gegangen von Eretz Yisroel, Bechlal nicht mit dem politischen Gedanken,
Throughout the history, Jewish people, these 2,000 years since the Jews were driven out of the land with the destruction of the temple, Jews constantly went there as individuals with totally no political aspiration, to gain any, just simply because of spirituality, to serve God in holiness. Usually it was older rabbis, and so he's not saying that, but usually rabbis who would retire, they would take a few students just to live off their life in the holiness of the Holy Land.
But there is no reason to establish
none whatsoever, no political, right. That's why they lived there throughout the hundreds and hundreds of years. There was a Jewish community.
And
they lived in peace, total peace with their neighbors.
Menschen sind gegangen, einer allein, zwischen der Araber, gegangen, gefahren Wochen, gefahren, immer genächtigt in arabische
Hotels,
hotels in Stiebe.
Yeah, and people would travel alone and go in the villages and towns and those throughout the history. They would go to the Arab and they would sleep in Arab and Muslim houses, and it was never a problem. It was never an issue. Yeah.
Gegangen in Hebron, einer allein. Es ist nicht beigefallen, man darf etwas mehr tun.
Right. In fact, I have it in one of the letters Rabbi Beck is just mentioning in traditional Torah opposition to Zionism. Historic documents. There's a letter also from Rabbi Baruch Kaplan of blessed memory. He was a great rabbi. He was the one who built up one of the largest girls' school movements, or the largest in the United States and throughout Europe, in the Holy Land, called Beis Yaakov. He built the girls' school system, and he was a student in Hebron in the 1920s. We have a letter from him where he writes. He actually, it was recorded. It was that he had spoken to his grandchildren. It was taped, the whole conversation, and he spoke about how the Jewish people lived in total harmony over there. He remembers because he was a student in Hebron, and he remembers how they used to go and take strolls in the Arab neighborhoods.
It's totally different right now. It's
Oh,
like,
Hebron, yes, yeah.
Hebron, dort bist du gewesen später.
Right, the Hebron massacre. Right, the Hebron massacre was
Van dem ist
right.
alles.
He said, and there was a very famous, in fact, the Zionists always talk about the Hebron massacre, and we have to really speak about that. That would happen because the Zionists used that
this is
later.
coming
Right,
process.
yeah, right. But basically, he spoke about before that. Before the Zionists came and incited, because he says it's purely because he says in this that was purely Zionist that incited the people in Hebron. But prior to that, he said they studied there. There was a school there, a famous rabbinical school, and the boys used to take strolls in the Arab neighborhoods. There was never a problem.
Noch bin ich schmarig waren in dem noch. Und die ganze Tatpart des Maße ist rausgekommen wegen Meuschel sein auf dem Arabais.
And in fact, yeah, in fact, the terrible Hebron massacre that happened in that year, in 1924, I think it was, that came directly. It was because the Zionists were inciting and they were making demonstrations that the Temple Mount is theirs, and they were making demonstrations saying that the Temple Mount is ours, with their chief rabbi. He's not saying that, but the chief rabbi of the Zionists that they had created, their rabbinate and chief rabbi, not recognized by us, but they went and they said it's our, it's ours. So they were inciting the Arabs, and that was direct. He says that in his statement. He said that was directly because of that happened. That the Arabs got totally angry, and unfortunately they didn't know to differentiate. We're not condoning, but they didn't differentiate between Jews and Zionists.
In kurzen, die Zionisten haben genutzt dem Inja von Chibas Uretz in der Kesher, was Jeden haben, sie Kedisches Eretz Yisroel, und sie genutzt für seine Change.
So, in short, the Zionists use the Jewish attachment, the emotional attachment, to the holiness of the land, and the commands of whatever that the God gives us that pertain to the land, all our attachments that we have of holiness, to transform it totally to this physical, to this ideology of Zionism, which is totally different, but they manipulate it, change that and trick Jews into this.
Auch nicht die freie Zionisten haben nicht gehabt keinen Platz. Es sind etliche einzige Rabbunen in dem Mizrachistischen Rabbunen, damals in jener Zeit, wo es haben zusammengemischt, die zwei Sachen zusammen, Kedisches Eretz Yisroel mit Ganken Eretz Yisroel. Mit dem Keuch haben sie gekannt, herankommen zwischen Jeden.
Wo sagt nicht der Fremde? Wo sagt auch nicht, was auch nicht?
Apur, was heißt nicht der Fremde?
Nein, ich gesagt auch nicht der Freie am gehabt.
Die Freie allein wird nicht gekannt, herankommen zwischen Jeden. Mit seinem Plan. Sie haben gemisst Nitzen, der pur Rebunen.
So
mit dem ganzen Mischmasch, mit dem ganzen Timmel von Eretz Yisroel, mit dem Gedanken.
Right. So like the Theodor Herzl and all these leaders that were blatant and open heretics, and that they didn't observe the Torah, they couldn't have been able to really have put their tentacles there, that grasp into the Jewish populace who were the religious, the communities, only with those few rabbis who were Mizrahi, it was called, in other words, the Zionist religious, who were able to use this confusion of from religion to changing to Zionist. They were the ones who made these inroads into the Jewish communities.
Like to justify, the mass immigration.
Right. To be and they able to get some position, some foothold in the religious Jewish communities, where the secular Zionists didn't have a stepping stone. They weren't able to get in there. The only ones who were able to, throughout from these few rabbis who were Zionists, who came along and confused the concepts of religion with, they were able to make this inroad and be able to breach the walls.
Yeah. Das ist eine Sache.
This is one issue. Yeah.
Zweite Sache ist noch stärker. Jeden warten auf Mashiach zit keine.
The second issue, as the Jews yearn and wait for the revelation, of the Messiah, the Mashiach. Yeah.
Was meint das?
What does this mean?
Das meint nicht, als aufsteht ein Mensch, macht eine Revolution, annehmen Yisroel, in welche gashmiesige, natürliche Unionen.
What is this Mashiach, this Messiah? It's not a person who's going to get up and make a revolution, a rebellion against the nations, and go up to the Holy Land and take over and make a state, some nationalism, like the Zionists do. Or not even with the Zionists, but even that concept. It's just the opposite. Yeah, we see, it's just the opposite. We see in our prayers on the high holy days, especially, that means the beginning of the year, the most you can say holy of prayers, or whatever, the most important prayers throughout the year, of the beginning of the high holy days, speaks about that we pray. What is the prayers there? We ask God that He should put His fear on His creations, and that we should accept King God's rule, and it says over there, and all the nations will make one bond, a bond together. They will join together to serve God. That's what we say. How could that happen? How could that be possible? This nation has this people believe like this. How could that be that all the nations together should come? Who can be able to accomplish such a thing? It's not possible.
In der ganzen Welt wird sehen, die ganze Welt wird sehen und anerkennen dem Rebbeinu.
So really it's impossible for this thing.
Die ganze Welt wird sein etwas anderes mit anderen Strafen.
It will be a different, in other words, the only way it will happen is because God will reveal His glory. So it will be a concept where the whole world will automatically see this and accept it upon themselves. It won't be that, this. So in other words, it will be a metaphysical change that the Almighty will make on the world. It will be a revelation where all humanity will accept it, and all the nations will come together and serve God automatically. So it's a happening that it can't be done through a man, through a person. This will be a godly happening. By us, the Jewish people, by our teaching, we know that this is only contingent on repentance. In other words, that we believe that we will repent and God will accept this and make this happen.
Das kann bestimmt nicht sein durch etwas Appeile oder durch etwas an normalen menschlichen Gedanken.
It can't happen through another, like a physical happening. Like you have a stronger gun, a bigger bomb, it can't happen through that. That's not the way it can happen. Or a person, a human concept. It can't happen in any that manner.
Dus hier bleiben mit der Emes.
And Jews believe this totally.
Jeden sind Ziegenbinden zu dem sehr stark.
And Jews are bound by this extremely, to the extreme.
Im Tura für den Guten tun, indem ich den Guten mehr wie Schiebe,
and we are expressly forbidden to take any actions to bring this about, this change. It's not possible to change, and and we are expressly forbidden. It's a command of God that we are not to make any attempt to end this exile. And these are the three oaths that I mentioned earlier. When King Solomon, when the destruction of the temple came about, God foresaw that there'll be people say, "Oh, we're frustrated. We have to do something," and He warned us: "Do not return en masse. Do not rebel against any nation. On the contrary, pray for the well-being of every country." And Jews, Beck is not saying this now. I'm saying the Jews. He just said I should mention. He said the three oaths. The Jews went through some very wicked and harsh rulers through these 2,000 years, and yet they prayed for the well-being of the king and the ruler and the czar and so forth, because it's a requirement of Judaism. That's what God requires of us. And thirdly, the third oath was not to make any attempt to leave exile.
It just totally contradicts Zionism.
Every aspect of this.
Wenn gekommen die Zionisten, ist genutzt die Machschuwe von Jeden, die Tikwe, sie Gili Kvod Hashem, aber sie gegeben von Jeden eine zweite Tikwe.
Right. So they took this yearning that we have for the revelation of God's glory for a yearning for a totally other issue. And you hear that they always use, again, Rebecca is not saying that, but they always say a Jewish mantra we say every year on the Passover holiday, which we celebrate that God took us out of Egypt, and we became free from being slaves for hundreds of years. So we say, we end that ceremony, that what we have to do on that holiday with L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, the coming year in Jerusalem. Everybody says this. And but what does it mean when we say it? Nobody means that you should buy a ticket next year. We'll buy a ticket and go to Jerusalem. It never meant that. Nobody thought like that in all the hundreds of years. Every child knows the coming year. It means one thing: the revelation of godly glory. That's what anybody who knows this is Judaism. A child never asks. You said it last year. Why didn't you take me to Jerusalem this year? Nobody thinks like that. It means the coming year in Jerusalem, because the whole ceremony, what we do, it's constantly speaking about when God will reveal His glory and so forth. And we believe, and that's what it's all about. And the Zionists use this mantra always, the coming year in Jerusalem. They use this emotional music on their advertisements. Now we finally have Jerusalem. They totally turn it on its head for a totally other issue.
Es geht so weit. Rashi bringt es sie, sagt es in dem Shemoneh in Tisha B'Av, sie zurückkommen, feierdige Beis HaMikdash in Himmel. In der Stadt Jerusalem wird auch dann herangenommen in Gebot Feier.
So was auch, das muss man sagen.
Das soll das sein.
Ja, sogar musst du Rochen ist der Gedanke, sogar. Nein, ich meine.
So steht, wir können das sehen.
Ja, so was willst du sagen mit dem? So was willst du sagen mit dem?
Ich will sagen, durch die Göttlichkeit.
Yeah, and we say there's a day. We say there's one day in the year that's considered the most sorrowful. Right. We say in our prayer, we have one day in the year that we fast from sundown through the next day sundown. It's considered the most serious day, the most mournful, the most sorrowful day of the Jewish people through the year, and it's this 2 days of the most serious fast we have. We have one day of Yom Kippur, a day of atonement, which is by the high holidays, and that's just to atone for our sins. The second day is because we mourn the destruction of the temple. These are the most serious fasts by the Jewish people, and it's fasting from sundown to the next day, and everybody has to fast. Men and women, we don't require small children to fast, but basically this. And in that the end of the day, when we're ready to break our fast, right before the end of the day, we say a prayer that says that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in fire, and God will rebuild the temple in Jerusalem in fire. It doesn't. It means it's like sort of like you say a spiritual concept. In other words, it won't be done through men. You're going to build a temple. We don't know what it will be. It's a spiritual, whatever God means that He'll build. Jerusalem will build in fire, and the temple of fire, whatever. It's some type of spiritual concept, but it's obviously not a physical that we're going to. We're not talking that we're going to build something here. And every Jew person who knows this Judaism knows that it will be the Almighty will build this. Without human intervention, this will be so it's a totally different yearning that we have than what the Zionists come along with.
Wenn gekommen die Primitionisten in genutzt die Tikve für jeden, auf die neue Tikve sie machen ein Land und sie machen ein Militär.
So these so-called religious Zionists took this yearning that we have. And they used it for a yearning to make a state and an army. And they made a total kneaded it together like a confusion of the two concepts.
In dem Koyach in der Clan Yisroel geworden herangedreht in dem neuen Gedanken Zionism.
And that's how they were able to bring in the Jewish communities, the Jewish wherever, amongst them, but amongst them, they were able to bring them in, pull them in, and snare them into this concept of Zionism.
Aber sie do seine Sach Jeden, wo sie halten sich bei der alten Machshuve.
But there's many Jews
Die ganze Welt.
Throughout the world who remain with the old thought process of the Jewish people.
In der andere, wo sie leider geworden angehabt. In dem Mix, in dem Bilbel, den gewonnen angehabt. In der Sachmul hat man sich Sachjiden, hat man sich viele von jenen Ochen, als nicht dus.
And the others, unfortunately, they did fall into it, but still, you always find people who all of a sudden realize, with a little education, whatever, they realize that they were duped, they were fooled.
Aber in Yisod, in Emes, der Gedanke in Zionism, is Yisroel der Hepech in der Akire von der Emes Emine.
But of course, in its essence, the Zionism is in its root. It's the opposite of what Judaism, and it's something that's uprooting the Jewish belief in Jewish religion.
Alle ehrliche Jiden haben die Emesse Hasuge in Kedisches Eretz Yisroel in der Tikve in der Hoffnung, der Emesse Hoffnung.
All God-fearing Jews have in them the Nachum der Erste sagte this bond with the holiness of the Holy Land.
And
the yearning and the true yearning for the revelation of the Almighty. Unfortunately, this confusion of Zionism is great. They use a lot of PR and this and that, so there's a lot of confusion, that's constantly spewed out amongst, in the Jewish communities. And with this, we'll be able to understand a very important issue.
Die Struf, wo sie kommen auf den Clan Yisroel, vor 70 Jahren zurück, wo sie solch nicht gehört geworden in der Historie, ist am Emes Tzedikim gesucht. Also sie kommen, weil man nicht genug Milchume gehalten gegen Zionismus.
Rabbi Beck is saying something that's extremely controversial. I mean, it's that the great leaders of Judaism said that this 70 years ago, when the Nazism came, this terrible nakba on the Jewish people. It was a result, they said, because we didn't stand up and fight enough against Zionism. We didn't oppose Zionism enough.
Damit verstehen, was ist der größere Chet?
Let us understand, what is this terrible crime, the sin that we did, that we didn't stand up against the Zionism?
Als ich meine, dass so der Struf bei dem ist, an die Materie des Besachen, in der Reistag geschehen.
Because in the prophecy of King Solomon, when it says these three oaths, it says if you will breach these three oaths of trying to leave exile, going back in mass, opposing, rebelling against the nations, it says if you will breach these oaths, you will be hunted. I will make your meat, your
Punished me.
you'll make your meat. It says, I'm literally translated. I'll make your meat free. In other words, you could be hunted like animals. In other words, anybody can kill and take you. In other words, that will happen, God forbid, if we breach these oaths. And this is exactly what happened 70 years ago, that the Jews were hunted like animals. Let us understand, why is this such a terrible crime, this breaching these oaths?
Aber laut von mir am jetzt Maßberg können wir es verstehen. Weil du ist nicht geschehen bloß an der Weile. Du ist geschehen a change, a yesoidige change für den ganzen Klal Yisroel.
So if you understand what we've explained now, because this is not just a sin, this is an uprooting of the whole concept of what it means, what Judaism is. This transformation, when you're trying to breach the oath, leaving exile, going, it's because it's uprooting the whole belief of what the belief system of a Jew is. That's why it's such a stringent thing by God.
A yesoidige change, und nicht bloß a change, sondern a größer Bilbel, was hat den ganzen gemacht, Churev, der reine Mine.
And it's this change is made confuse the whole purity of belief in God.
Nur der Krieg. Sie werden da größer. Leider sind geblieben Ohren von Rabunen. Ohren zerbrochen und zerstochen. Jesäumen ist haben die Zionisten gehabt Gelegenheit aufzukochen der Kummergefühl. In so das was geschehen, was sich stellen auf die Fies.
After this terrible tragedy, this terrible thing that happened, this atrocity, the Second World War, so the Jewish people remained leaderless. I mean, almost all in its entirety, the rabbis were killed. They remained orphans. The older people all were killed. Or died because they couldn't, whatever, they were murdered in the concentration camps, and they died, but nobody could live through whatever happened there, and so remained the youth, a little bit of some youth, poor, destitute, and and the Zionists used this weakness, and also the feelings of that a person wants to have revenge. They use this, they abuse this to be able to gain a foothold.
Ich habe getracht, das ist an die Yeshia. Das ist ein menschliche, natürliche Gefühl. Damit sich nicht lassen.
And so they use this, like the natural feeling of that, we're not going to let ourselves anymore, never again, which they use the mantra of that, never again. So they use this feeling. I just want to say that what he's saying in this thing is not Rabbi Beck's view. Like I said, many great rabbis said it. In fact, the chief rabbi of Palestine, who I mentioned a few times already, Rabbi Teitelbaum of blessed memory, who was the chief rabbi of Palestine for many years, and he passed away around 30 odd years ago, moved to the United States and recreated his community called Satmar Rebbe. He writes this in one of his great books that he put out on the called Vayom Moshe. In the preface to this book, he writes this issue, what Rabbi Beck is saying, that the rabbis said that they were that this came because we were not standing up in opposition to Zionism.
Die Zionisten halten in Einsung alle, als mehr hat nicht sagen Holocaust, das darf man dem bedienen, weil es soll nicht mehr sagen Holocaust. Also das ist die Bewohnerung für jeden.
The Zionists keep on saying that the reason we need this state, that there shouldn't be again another Holocaust. We need this as an insurance policy. And in truth, it's just the opposite. They brought about the Holocaust. Both because of the sin that they brought about, that God's wrath. And secondly, because they incited, they again, we're not of course condoning what the Nazis did or say they're not going to be held responsible by God. They're going to be to the letter of the law, to the exact thing they'll have to pay for what they did. But they incited the Nazis also. They incited Hitler, and we have records of that. Many books. We have a book called The Holocaust, Victims Accused. It's unbelievable, and there's many other books that shows how both they colluded with the Nazis, and then afterwards they incited the Nazis. And great rabbis, Rabbi Weiss, they said they challenged Hitler. They said, we're going to boycott you, and Hitler said, I'm going to take up your book. There's many things they did when Jews were being to be so. There's so much I will get into later, but there's a book called 51 Documents from Lenny Brenner, I think his name is, 51 Documents. It shows how they worked with the Nazis, and it's unbelievable. I'm not saying all the Zionists worked with the Nazis, but many did, and they definitely incited the Germans, and they held back the rabbis from trying to placate the Nazis. In the middle, the rabbis could have saved millions of Jews, most probably, because they tried to approach and buy off the Jews, and this was recorded by Rabbi Weiss, the great leader of the Jewish, and he has many schools. And there was a book called Perfidy from Ben Hecht, a very famous. He had somebody. Rabbi Weissman had secret dealings. He tried to with the heads of with Eichmann, his henchmen there, who was the heads of the concentration camps. So the last years when they invaded Hungary, and that he wanted to buy off all the Jews of Hungary, and they promised they'll bring them the money, and the Zionists thwarted his efforts. They got the messages, and it's something we have to talk about. That they said, we don't want these Jews of the Zionists. Weizmann, the first president of Israel, and the one who was really the one who was pivotal in getting Britain to give them the land. And we have those letters, how we had a meeting in 1938. And again, it's in the book of Traditional Torah Opposition to Zionism. And Chaim Weizmann said in 1938 at a meeting. And in October 1802, in the Jewish press, a Zionist paper, Chaim Weizmann said at a meeting of the Zionists that they knew, because they were very well connected, and they knew there were powerful organizations of Zionists at that time already. And they were discussing that they saw that the writing on the wall that the Jews are going to be murdered, that the Nazis want to kill them. And he said, and had a conversation if they should try to get the Jews into Palestine from the religious communities. And this is what he said: Palestine, Chaim Weizmann, Palestine cannot absorb the Jews of Europe. We want only the best of Jewish youth to come to us. We want only the educated to enter Palestine for the purpose of increasing its culture. The other Jews will have to stay where they are and face whatever fate awaits them. These millions of Jews are dust on the wheels of history and may have to be blown away. We don't want them pouring into Palestine. We don't want Tel Aviv to become another low-grade ghetto. This is how much they detested the religious Jews, and there's much more than that. But I'm just scratching the surface. You should understand what we're dealing with. What Rabbi Beck is saying, that they were responsible both spiritually and physically. It is a lot. This is not a simple, a wild statement. Rabbi Beck is not here now. I could just tell you that when it came to saving the Jews, we have so much documentation. We have. I have a letter here. There was a documentary that was just put out a few years ago called Sugi Haris. It's about how the Japanese just print Sugihara, how heroic Japanese diplomats saved Jewish refugees in World War II. And this was how he gave out visas and things. It was a tremendous deeds he did. He saved thousands and tens of thousands of Jews. And they write in the middle of this documentary that is shown. He talks about how the Japanese offered in the middle of the war to take in all the Jews of Europe because they had a very good history with the Jewish people, because when there was a Japanese-Russian war, the Jews helped them. A whole story about how a Jewish, like a banker, helped them and saved them. So therefore, they felt the Jews would be very good to have in the land. So they said, well, they want to be. Europe wants to throw them out. We'll take them in. They offered without any. So they went. They had a delegation go to Stephen Weiss, who was a Reform rabbi in New York, who was one of the heads supposedly that represents Judaism. As always, unfortunately, the Zionists and their leaders put themselves in the position to supposedly they represent the Jews. He went and they approached him to the Stephen Weiss, this Japanese delegation. He said, we're offering to take the Jews without any documentation. It's in this in this documentary of Sigara. And he said this, and he says in this documentary, he says that the Stephen Weiss grabbed them by the collar and led them out of his office. And he tries to explain it away, this documentarian, whoever wrote this document. He said that, well, maybe he was afraid, he didn't know how they're going to live in Japan. So imagine that. The Jews were being slaughtered, and he had an opportunity to save them. And the same thing was in, this we can on and on and on, in this Holocaust victims accused, this documents and testimony of Jewish war criminals by Moshe Schoenfeld, of blessed memory. We have here that unbelievable things that Gehir stands up. Britain was accused of colluding with of being complacent when the Jews were being murdered by the Holocaust. And in this book, I have in our book that I've mentioned before, in the traditional Torah opposition to Zionism, we have a few pages of this book, the Holocaust. They could have saved untold millions of Jews. And who stopped it? Zionism, many times. And there's so much more to this than I can, not for now, but we'll go back to regress to what Rabbi Beck is talking about. He was speaking about that both spiritually, and that because they brought upon the wrath of God, and physically how what they brought with the Nazi Holocaust. He has to end, Rabbi Beck says.
Zionism is a cancer in the gift, the body of Klal Yisroel.
He says Zionism is a cancer in the body of the Jewish nation.
Menschen suchen verschiedene Beschreibungen. Die ganze Sache ist a Kiris für Minne, ist a moirdige Able in der Ziche, was sie geschehen.
And many people have different solutions, come up with different solutions for this. It won't take long. He has a small parable.
A Mensch gekommen, einer gekommen als Gast bei zweiten Mensch. Hat mit sich $100,000. Hat gebeten, den Malachsanje soll es ihm behalten. Hat es ihm behalten. Morgen dafür ihm beten, soll zurückgeben das Geld. Sagt ihm, weil heute wollen wir ja noch. Das kann man nicht gewählen. Na klar, das ist Geld $100,000. Wir kommen zum Schäufert. Sagt er, klar, der Herr im Tahim, was da ist. Klar, sagt der Schäufert, weißt du was? Mit machen eine Chalike. Und ich leuke, geben zurück $50,000. Sagt er, was ist los? Mein Geld, $100,000. What's the solution?
Yeah. He says a parable. He says somebody went to somebody as a guest, and he gave him that he should put away for him in a safe $100,000. And the next day he wants to leave. He asks him for the $100,000. He says, "Never happened. I didn't take anything." So he goes to the judge. And, "What are you talking about? It's my money, $100,000." And he goes to the judge, and the judge says, "You know what? We'll make peace there. We'll make a divide. You take 50,000 and you take this." He says, "What are you talking about? It's my money, $100,000.
Das selbe doch. Andere sagen, dass the solution is mit machen two state.
Yeah.
Das bringt zu David.
So he says that the people say they want to make a two-state solution. It's the same exact example. He said.
Ein größer Avle, die Zionisten haben sich besetzt auf den Kopf in der Palästinenser Volk. Wie ich mache schon mal gesagt, als ein Land, ein Land und Schulen,
Yeah.
für Menschen und ein Land.
Yeah. He said.
Es ist ein größer Avle, das ist nicht der MS.
Yeah.
Hat eine Gemeinde Palästina.
Yeah, he says. So he said there's two issues. He said here that this breaching of the Jewish issues between that we have with the Almighty and the terrible crime that they're doing to the Palestinian people. He said that Herzl, his name should be obliterated. Said when they made the state, he said that a land without a people for a people without a land. What are you talking about? It was inhabited by the Palestinian people, and he says a land without a people. You're doing a terrible crime to these people of Palestine.
In Jiddischkeit tun nicht existieren kann. Jeden tun nicht tun mit einem vielen Auswirkungen.
And spiritually, Jews are not allowed to have a state. Period. Whether regardless if it was inhabited, not inhabited,
Even if it was empty.
even if it would be empty.
Die Bilbilen werden nicht keine richtige Bilbilen.
These confusions is just all these reasons, and that they're giving with their claiming Jewish reasons is totally not true.
Wir haben Scheichs jetzt, aber Bechlal nicht kann politisch.
Yes, we have a connection to Eretz Yisrael, to the Holy Land, but not the political connection.
Wir warten auf die Gile Schleine.
We wait.
Das ist der Heppich in dem, wo das
we wait for the redemption, what we call redemption, godly, but it's totally the opposite of what the state of Israel means. It's not this type of redemption.
Wir kicken aus zum Rebäune Schleine.
And we look to the Almighty that He should bring a solution to this terrible issue. That's what Rabbi Beck had to say.
Thank you. Okay, so we talk about action and reaction. So right now there is a state of Israel, and this state of Israel is established upon the state or we need you to talk more about like what provoked this kind of like anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism, in Middle East, and especially like in the Holy Land.
Yeah, with the help of the Almighty, the concept of anti-Semitism is ages old. I mean, we believe that everything is from the Almighty. In our law books, we have the rabbis tell us that anything good or bad that happens to a person is not just happens, and it's because of God willed it, and that therefore if there's a decree against Jews, they have to gather and fast and pray and be introspective and see why this happened. We see that a city in Jonah the prophet, there's a book of prophecy of Jonah, sent to the city of Nineveh, which was not a Jewish city. God sent him as a prophet to tell them that they should repent or else He will destroy the city. This was our belief, that a tsunami, earthquake, anything that happens, a famine, God forbid, plague, whatever, God forbid, all these things, it's because it's something not just happens, it's a message from the Almighty.
Like there is reason behind
Right, and anti-Semitism, we believe, again, we never condone the actions of somebody who does, like if somebody kills somebody, we believe that the one who killed is a murderer and will be punished. And if there's witnesses or whatever, how the system of the country is, they should punish him, or whatever it is, the system. But God will definitely punish him. But the one who was killed, God forbid, the person was killed, it was because it was a decree of God. If it wouldn't have been decreed that he should die, it wouldn't have happened. The person would never been able to kill. The same thing is good and bad. It's all, we believe, nothing. Everything that happens is the will of the Almighty. God rules the world. Anti-Semitism, we believe, is a message from the Almighty to remind us to repent and to be closer to God. It's always a message. That said, again, the people who commit anti-Semitism will be punished.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, but there is a different type of this, an anti-Semitism which we found was for no reason whatsoever. Jews were accused of using matzah for their matzos, which is required on Passover blood. Although anybody who lives in a Jewish community, who knows Judaism, knows that matzahs is one of the most stringent things by Jewish people, that we have to see from the time of the cutting of the wheat, that nothing gets mixed into it, and that it's made out of pure water and wheat, and nothing, not even salt. It costs a fortune to make, because we have to be so careful. Everything has to be kosher, the utensils and so forth. And not only, and blood is totally forbidden for a Jew to eat. So I mean, the whole concept is so weird, it's so outlandish. But it's a wicked accusation against the Jewish people, and it has no basis. And there was many times there were blood libels and Jews were murdered, and a lot of times Jews were used as an excuse when there was a bad time the economy was bad, and they would right away accuse the Jews. So there was these concepts. Again, that said, that's one thing, but there is a issue, for instance, like you have Zionism. And it's not only, for instance, this is the main issue here. You have Zionism, which comes along, and they go and they take a land away from a people, and if anybody says anything, so right away they say, "Oh, you're anti-Semitic. You're against the Jewish people." So that's a disgusting, deplorable accusation. And they simply using the Jews, just like Rabbi Beck was explaining at length, that they're using the Jewish religion in order, they incorporate the religion into their nationalism in order to give it a facade of holiness and and legitimacy, that people should back and support it. The Zionists picked Palestine because they will be able to use this concept of the Holy Land and make it like a religious issue, religious nationalism.
It's going to strengthen, Zionism ideology.
Right, and when they use the Star of David, they call it the Jewish state instead of calling it the Zionist state. Whatever, if they would have made it in Uganda, whatever, but they call it a Jewish state, and it's like as if it has to do with the Jewish religion, and it's the will of the Jewish people. And the more religious you are, the more you want it, supposedly, which is totally not true. But therefore, so anybody who opposes it, you're opposing Judaism, you're opposing the Jewish people, and you're anti-Semitic. So they're using this.
I want to just comment about this, right now, we see how much the current leaders or the right wing in Israel, they insist in calling Israel as a Jewish
exactly, a Jewish state.
A Jewish state. I think, just to let you, to comment on you,
that's 100% true. In fact, that when they had the Camp David Accords, whatever, they insisted that when they were writing their agreements, they should write the Jewish state. They use that, and they want the ones who oppose them not to say we're against Zionism. They want them to say we're against the Jews or the Jewish state. Then they can write with, he's anti-Semitic.
They will stigmatize it with it,
and that's part of this terrible, terrible tragedy. So they've brought upon the Jewish people this mistrust, this animosity that Jews, I keep on repeating, we lived in Muslim and Arab lands for hundreds and hundreds of years and enjoyed their friendship. It was a safe haven for Jews when Jews suffered in Europe this type of oppression of the Crusades and the Inquisition, that everybody had to convert to Christianity, and the Jews were burnt at the stake and they were murdered. And where did Jews go? They went to the Muslim lands as a safe haven, and they flourished in the Muslim lands. And now the Zionists come and they take these people and wholesale and refer to them as anti-Semitic, and that they don't accept other religions. So it's really, really deplorable, and we're frustrated because we as a Jewish people have to show our gratitude for the Muslim people for being so kind to us, and for the Arab nations and the Muslim nations that were so kind to us throughout history, and how all of a sudden, because of these people calling in the name of Judaism, they're vilifying these people, and the effect, of course, in the Western world, they're also being vilified because of this.
So you earlier mentioned, actually showed me this picture, right now in Palestine, when Rabbi Rabbi Beck mentioned, Jewish people lived hundreds of years in Palestine, never happened until Zionism came. Right now, Palestinian people Palestinian people right now, when they see any Jewish person, even someone who's wearing the holy the custom, the Jewish custom right now, they fear from this person, and they think this person is the enemy.
Right, and like this picture is just one example of so many that we've seen. That when
so my question,
yeah.
who created this, animosity between two nations, who lived together for a long time?
Now, I mean, there was just this week. There was unfortunately some Arab person, a Palestinian person, went in and hacked to death. Two people went in and hacked to death some Jewish people. And last weekend, like the last few weeks, there were people who were murdered. A guy drove in with a car and killed a person who we know was a Jewish rabbi. When he drove into this person was directly an anti-Zionist who demonstrated against the Zionist state. And I mean, obviously he didn't. This person, the Arab person, the Palestinian person who ran into him, didn't know that he's killing an anti-Zionist. But so saying, unfortunately, they confuse the issue, because but Zionism does that. Zionism can only stand on the fact that they call it a Jewish state. They can only exist because if it wouldn't be that it's a Jewish state, people would say, is the world nuts? We're going to have to sink in billions and billions of the American dollars and other people in this endless rivers of bloodshed and suffering for what? That somebody who came along, a group of people somewhere in Europe, and came along with an ideology, and they have some plan, and we're going to keep on supporting this and sitting around and using our greatest diplomats and everybody's to support a plan that's sick, that is that is flawed in its essence. It's selfish. It's that to have. Imagine you say that we want to create a Buddhist state. We want to create a Christian state in the land. Why? Where does that lie in the logic of democracy or either that? So it is so flawed in its essence. But they say they wave the Torah as a deed, that it's God given to them, and the Jews suffered in the Holocaust. They use many issues to confuse, and that they.
Actually, Zionism started before the Holocaust.
Exactly, but they used the guilt ride of that people that was silent when the Jews were being slaughtered in mass by the Holocaust, that they should support and have sympathy for the Jews that suffered, that we have to give them a place that they should be able to live. The Zionists ride on that, and they build on that. But in truth, it's so ironic because they are the greatest factory of exacerbating anti-Semitism. And people, instead of, they think that when they're supporting and helping the Jewish people and sympathizing for the suffering, Rabbi Beck was in a bunker for months when the Nazis invaded Hungary, and barely escaped with his life. His mother was murdered, and other relatives, majority of relatives, were murdered. As were my grandparents was murdered. My father escaped when the Nazis came to Hungary, and he was able to go to Italy. Eventually, came to America. But the vast majority of my relatives, both from my father's and my mother's side, they were murdered. My mother's Polish relative. But basically, so this is clear now that Zionism is this cause of the reason that there is a rift between the Jews and the Muslims, not the religion. This is not a religious conflict, because even just without getting into the details, but the history, the recent history shows us that Jews, before there was Zionism, which is not so long ago, Zionism is around 150 years, but the creation of the state is almost 70 years, and Jews are alive today that remember prior to Zionism, that lived together in Mea Shearim, lived in the Jewish areas, in the towns and villages in Palestine. Your relatives are from Safed.
Yeah,
Rabbi Beck's grandparents, wife's grandparents are also from there, and they lived together. They lived together in the same city, in the same town, without any policemen. There was maybe a local policeman, but they lived, whole communities lived together in total peace. And so you see that if it would be a religious issue, there would have been massacres, and yet Jews flourished. And you can go see in Egypt and Tunisia, Morocco, and go through all of them, and in Iran and all these countries. You'll see there's Jewish synagogues that were till recently. I mean, they have the etched in the wall. You see the dates. They flourished as Jewish communities, and they weren't massacred. Today, that couldn't happen almost in most countries because of the animosity, the rift, and that people think that if you're a Zionist, you're a Jew, you're a Zionist. So you see that. So what Zionism did was one of their ploys is they took the religion and they used it to as a facade to clothe their nationalistic movement in this. It's the wolf in the sheepskin. And they're using this and therefore, so when the laymen, the people around the world think, oh, it's a Jewish state. They use the Star of David. They have they call it Israel, which is Yisroel, my name from the Bible. It's they use all these Jewish symbols, the menorah, and so people. So obviously, the more religious you are, the more Jewish you are, the more you support the state. So if they're angry at what the state is doing to the Palestinian people, you're angry at the Jew. So this is a terrible, terrible result. And of course, the result that the world, if they're the ones who support Israel, so they're angry at the Palestinian people, and they're angry because why you hate the people because of their religion. Mm-hmm. So it's a terrible, terrible Nakba tragedy. I could just say that when this week when these people were murdered, the Jewish people were murdered, they were hacked in a synagogue. They went in and hacked, not because they were Zionists. They went into a synagogue and because we're not condoning it in any manner. But the chief rabbi and the rabbinate from not the Zionist rabbinate, we don't recognize that chief rabbi and rabbinate. It's only the window dressing, a facade of Zionism. It's only to legitimize their illegitimate country. But there is a chief rabbi and a rabbinate there, and they put out a statement, and it's on the internet, and it's all, and this is what they said. We have to get together and fast and pray. We're going to get together and pray and say psalms, and we have to be introspective, look at our deeds, why this is coming about, and we can't hold back from saying that the reason that this came about is because of the spirit of nationalism that spread out to bring the hate of the nations around us. And especially the ones who are like the worst sinners, the ones who try to bring others to sin, who went up on the Temple Mount, which is punishable according to the Jewish religion by being cut off from God. That's the worst crime that could be, that cut off from God. In other words, because it happens to be that, again, just as we mentioned before, that Zionism is against the Torah, against Judaism, because both were not allowed to have a state, even if it would be uninhabited, and secondly, we're not allowed to steal and kill, and especially people who have done such good to us. Going on Temple Mount, for 2,000 years, Jews did not go. In the last 2,000 years, way before there was an issue of, even before there was Islam, Jews knew they're forbidden to go on the Temple Mount because it's a holy place, and we're not on that. On the purity, there's a certain purification process that we don't have today, and to go there, you cut off from God if you go there. And Jews never go up on the Temple Mount. And the Jews went to pray it was under the Waqf for the last 1,000 years, 1,200 years, or whatever it is now. And the Jews would ask permission from the Waqf, and they gave us. The Jews used to always go pray. There was never a problem before Zionism came about. But we would never go past the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. Past there is forbidden. And so these people went up on the Temple Mount that as these rabbis write in their way, that the punishable by death. And this is the latest in especially that this brings the wrath of the nations upon us. And as long as we are in exile, that means till the revelation of the Almighty, when all humanity will be there, we believe God will rebuild the temple of Himself. We don't have any rule over there. At all, and we don't have any rules. I mean, in other words, any rule, not only in the Temple Mount, but at all. And we don't have a will to take from the nation that is under their control. We have no will to take it even.
This is a statement like
this is a statement that was just issued 2 days ago from the chief rabbi and the rabbinate in Palestine, signed under by the chief rabbi Yitzchak Weiss, who's not my relative, happens to be the chief rabbi of Palestine, and the whole court. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rabbis from the court signed under.
And those people, like those rabbis, they live in Jerusalem.
Sure, and I'll show you a picture. One of the I have books here that we show.
And they are like right now they are risking their life, and they are like staying there.
Risking their life. They are there because the Jewish people was a community that lived prior to Zionism, and as we've showed you letters that they went to the state, to the court, to the United Nations delegations and pleaded that we do not want a Jewish state. Here you have Rabbi Dushinsky in 1947, the chief rabbi of Palestine at the time. We have a picture of Rabbi Dushinsky approaching this is a Rabbi Dushinsky in a book called The Struggle, booklet, and you have here a picture where Rabbi Dushinsky is sitting with the in front of the delegation, the representatives of the United Nations, pleading with them, and one of the letters that they sent, he says, "We plead with you. We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." This was the leader of the Jewish community, declaration before the United Nations, July 16, 1947.
Right.
And I could just say that since day one, since Zionism came, the Jews were demonstrating there and around the world. They were never militant.
And this is in Palestine, in Jerusalem.
Is in Jerusalem and Palestine.
Like
Jews are being brutally beaten. This I'm not sure. This is if this is in Jerusalem or other places in Palestine. This is one of many. Thousands and thousands of pictures, and so we have here a book that called Hamulchama, the war on Zion.
And right now, the state of Israel wants to force the Jewish people to enlist in the army. By the way, it's
exactly, and there was big, tremendous here. You could just see so many, you see the Israeli soldiers brutally beating the Jews because we demonstrate. So these demonstrations
right now,
are ongoing.
Jewish people are rejecting
of course.
Enlist in the.
They knew the Zionists always test the water every period of time.
So this is
they
not
try
the first
to
time they
try to draft the Jews, and it gets big demonstrations, and they beat and they arrest Jews. There's almost nobody who's above 15 or whatever the age that hasn't sat in prison. Everybody sits in prison over there from the Jewish people, the religious community. They brutally beat them. Yet there's ongoing demonstrations. Assassinated the Jews. I can tell you, and again in this book and many other books, there's always through the 1920s till today, Jewish people have been assassinated by the Zionists, the ones who are outspoken. I can show you pictures
with Yasser Arafat.
This was the one who was representative in the Rabbi Moshe Hirsch, blessed memory, passed away 2 years ago. They threw acid in his face, and he was blind in one eye and barely was able to see from another eye by the Zionists.
And here is also with the Muslim leader.
Yeah, because we go to all the leaders, we try to get this message across. But I could show you again demonstration after demonstration, and the ones who are and every single time you'll have Jews who are. This rabbi was murdered. This was murdered, assassinated. And
so anyone who's opposed Zionism, even if he's Jewish.
If they deem them too much of a threat, yes, certainly. The threat, we all get death threats, and the ones who are very
vocal. By the way,
vocal,
are you guys getting any
certainly death threats, and we were attacked and we were hit. But
here
thank God, but thank God here in the United States, the police protect us. But in Palestine, they get brutally beaten. We have demonstrations, tens of thousands of Jews constantly demonstrating.
Yeah, but again, even here,
yes,
you guys are
attacked. Yes. Yes, certainly. But as I say, thank God, God protects us and blessed us with the police that they protect us from the Zionists, or else we would be. They even told us. I mean, they say if it wouldn't be for the police, I was standing in front of a hotel, and they had the prime minister came or whatever with his guys, and they had they call the Shin Beis, their secret police, and they said openly, they said if they looked at us and they said, we were standing there and saying, if I could put a bullet in your head now, I would do it. They told me, they said it to us, but they're constrained because God doesn't let them, this police here, so, but anyway, here, Netanyahu came to President Obama, tens and tens of thousands demonstrated against him.
We don't see these
and you don't see these
in the news, Well,
But I just wanted to show you just
yeah.
a picture of you, the chief rabbi we mentioned here. This is the chief rabbi of Palestine by demonstration, which is
And
ongoing.
he considered himself a Palestinian person, Jewish.
He's actually well today he would be he's a Palestinian because he's living there many years. Yeah,
So
but-
you
yeah.
can be a Jewish and Palestinian.
Sure you can. Yeah.
Like you can, like, you know, carry the Palestinian nationality if there is a Palestinian nationality.
If we would carry it, if we proudly be a Palestinian, we even suggested to the Palestinian leadership that as soon as they get a nationhood, we would love to be a Palestinian citizen. I could just say though, but it would be contingent if the Palestinian people would want us to be. In other words, we can't force them to give. If they want, we would humbly ask them permission to be able to live amongst them, and if it's their will, then we can live as citizens amongst them, like in any other country.
In any other country, yes.
Right.
So right now, let's switch to the future. Since we just talked about this, and if Rabbi Beck wants to...
I'm sorry. I'm interrupting. Before we go to the
it's
future,
okay,
I
go
just
for
want
it.
to mention.
And
for
this is a
instance-
picture with Hania
Yes. We went to Gaza.
to Gaza.
And we brought medical aid. We went a few times. We brought vans. We brought later we had.
So you talk about
this was
the
the latest
activities
one.
you guys
Yeah,
do,
we
like
brought we this was donated by Norway and us as this is written in Arabic also. Donated a gift from people in Norway and from global
سيارة
anti-Zionist
إسعاف إلى
Jews.
غزة هدية من الشعب النرويجي من يهود ضد الصهاينة.
Yeah.
Jewish against Zionism.
Zionism, but unfortunately we couldn't take this in now because of the politics and because we didn't want to go through Israel to take it in, the occupied Palestine. So we always go through Egypt.
So do you guys have problem if you go through Israel?
Well, we wouldn't because although I have many Jews in Palestine and occupied Palestine who are anti-Zionist, and many who lived there prior to the state, as Rabbi Beck did, and many who left because they didn't want to be but many stayed there because they had many rabbis. There was a difference of opinions. Many said that we shouldn't forsake the land to the Zionists. We have to stand and fight from within. So they stand and oppose them from within, make demonstrations, and they don't want to give it. Many people
And they
can't
get
live,
beat,
and many people can't live. If people have older parents, relatives, it's very hard. They don't know another language. They don't get visas for other countries. It's human problems. So there's many hundreds of thousands of Jews who are living there who are anti-Zionist and they're living there. Some people who are less fearful are more vocal. Not everybody can be vocal because they see what happens to Jews who will stand there and get brutally beaten and arrested. But there are many people. But there are many who left. And the chief rabbi of Palestine himself remained with the title Chief Rabbi of Palestine, who passed away around 30 odd years ago. When he passed away, the title went back to somebody in Jerusalem. But the Chief Rabbi of Palestine, who lived in Palestine, then left Palestine. And he used to encourage people to leave Palestine, that they shouldn't be under the Zionist occupation.
Okay.
And Rabbi Beck is one of many. He left with his children, although they didn't
And
speak
he said,
another language.
if you give me $1 million, I'm not gonna go there.
Exactly, that's what he said. Even for $1 million, he won't put his foot into the land because he doesn't want to be
Unless
under,
if there is a Palestinian, maybe
Oh yes,
okay.
if it would be under Palestinian
So
control.
here is what I understand.
So-
So you guys against the state of Israel to be there is a state of Israel.
Exactly. So we went through, before you finish that question, we went through Egypt a few times, and we went to Gaza, and we met here with Ismail Haniyeh because we're non-political. We met with President Abbas also, and just to let everybody know that the issue, whatever they want, is leadership.
Here is Jewish
rabbis. The delegation
rabbis.
was a representative from
And
Canada,
Khalil
from England, and from the U.S., which is me, and we had a letter sent from the people of Palestine because they couldn't come in, from the rabbis from Palestine, showing our loyalty to the people of Palestine. Now, what I wanted to say is that he was then Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh, and he spoke in a press conference. He said, "We have nothing against the Jewish people."
Can you zoom in here? It's okay. Can you?
We have nothing against the Jewish people.
Figure it out.
Our problem is with the occupation, but we would very much want to live together with Jewish people, and this is a simple fact that like history was. So I want, in other words, if we are accepted, then we would love to live amongst them. We said we would be the first to want to accept the Palestinian citizenship. And it's clear that this is not the issue that they're opposed to the Jewish people living amongst them. The issue is that they're being occupied and their freedom is taken away, and the rule of their land and the rule of their homes and respect and so forth. All the problems that in our country we could say, and we hope and we yearn that for the immediate cessation, the end of the state of Israel in its entirety, that it should be a mirage that passed, and we hope that God should help that it should happen without any suffering to both the Palestinian people and the Jewish people. I mean, God, who brings about miracles, who will bring the end of the state, we are certain.
So you guys are certain like this, the state is gonna
we are certain it will happen. In the Torah it says, there's a verse in the Torah that says, why are you rebelling against me? It will not be successful. The state cannot be successful because it is a clear rebellion against God. And I think you can even see that not a 10-year period passes that they don't have a war. They're constantly under fear and living in existence.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's not a successful state. It's only gets worse from day to day. They themselves, they speak out of two sides of their mouth, whatever's convenient. So here they say, with the insurance policy for Jews, ironically, and they concentrate the Jews there, and then they turn around and they say, wow, Iran has a nuclear power,
this is also like, right now, like a state of Israel, like we talk about the security of Jewish, like they live in fear.
It's not
like
they
are among it's like they have problems with their neighbors. They always like the mad dog, like this aggression and aggressive attitude against like their neighbors, against Arab states, against Muslims, also like states, and they are among. It's like in the middle.
It's crazy. It defies logic.
Like for how long they're gonna survive?
So in other words, logically, it defies a reason that if they want to claim that they're doing this to make an insurance policy, but you're doing it in a place where you're just agitating amongst people who don't want you. Statistically, in a year, a matter of a difference of opinion, how many years, but everybody agrees that statistically they'll be outnumbered in their own state by the Arab populace. And what the Arab populace are supposed to declare loyalty to a Jewish state, to a Jewish. I mean, it's crazy that, in other words, that they instead, but so they say, oh no, it's a democracy. You're full of confusion. It's illogical. The whole thing is illogical.
Democracy and Jewish state, like anyone who is not Jewish is like out of the democracy. Yeah.
It's two contradictory ideas. The Jewish state, and I say, asking about why. Well, in the Torah it says it will not be successful. So it's clear to us this state will end. We always pray to God that it should happen soon, speedily.
Is there like a time expectation?
It doesn't. We're not prophets. We only know that it's like Rabbi Beck gives an example always. He said that a person was being sentenced to death, and when he was sentenced to death, he went. They took him from one place of the country to the other. So they put him in a wagon. They started leading him away, and he goes from one town to the other. And he says, "Hey, it's already 3 days, 4 days, nothing's happening. Well, it looks like it's okay, but every single day he's going closer. He doesn't really appreciate what's happening every day." So our rabbis, Rabbi Teitelbaum, blessed memory, says, my hair stands on end when I think about what is the result, what's going to be here. This is how much death and suffering. We pray to God every day that with His compassion He should bring about this end without any more suffering and bloodshed. And the Zionism turns to the world every time it says, look, they just murdered people in Jerusalem. They just murdered. Finish the sentence. You brought about this, like the rabbis in Palestine just said. I can't hold ourselves back from saying that you are the Goyim, you are the cause. This is the cause. Zionism. It's like you're putting a piece of sand in an eye. It's causing. It's agitating. It's not the religion. These religions were living together, and you drove something in, and the world is trying to force this some this way and that way, building walls, separation walls, doing every time they come now the Iron Dome and this and that and everything. We're not condoning violence, but what is this? All patchwork. You're putting band-aids on a hemorrhaging wound, and every time then you're blaming the wound, you're blaming and you say, it's this time it's Hamas, this time it's Hezbollah, this time it's this, it used to be PLO, and today PLO is the good ones, and this one, and what is the bad? Let's look why. These people live together with Jews, and they say they profess that they want to live together with Jews, and the history is they lived in the same towns. They lived. President Abbas, I spoke to him, and I spoke to many others. They lived in the same towns with Jews. They helped each other. Why all of a sudden they became enemies? Why the Jewish communities where we live in, and you go across from Manhattan, Williamsburg, the most concentrated religious Jewish area, or as I've showed you here in our areas, you don't see a Jew, you didn't see one Israeli flag. You go to Williamsburg, it's all anti-Zionist. The more religious, the more anti-Zionist, and we oppose it. Why? Because it's against God, to kill, to steal, to have a state, and these are the ones who are full of compassion.
Also, it's because that's what I want to wrap up about it. It's the state of Israel hasn't provided security for the Jewish people.
Right.
It's you see, they, as you mentioned, the wall, the defense. This is the huge military right now, in Israel. But still, people don't feel safe.
And like I say, we have ambulatories, so full of compassionate issues happen from these people are the ones who are compassionate, and they feel for other fellow Jews. And the Zionists say they're the ones who have the compassion, they want the insurance, and they've put us into a position that is an endless river of blood because of their forcing their ideology, their flawed ideology, on these three communities, the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish community, and we are being brutally beaten. Not as what the Palestinians physically are being brutally beaten. We are brutally beaten. We suffer from them. Our religious issues are suffering. They dig up graves. I could show you in some of these pictures. I could show you they're digging up graves because they want it for the hotel areas, for archaeological purposes. They cut up dead people, which is forbidden according to the Jewish law, to study the bodies and to sell body parts. It's there. I'm not making up these things. It's Tuche Mason. We have special watches. The second a person dies, we have committees that run and stand by the bed of the person that they shouldn't, which in the United States is not permitted without permission. So you have, unless without the family permission. So you have this ongoing. Rabbi Beck will testify to this, that he was in Palestine. How many times they made demonstrations because they took bodies, they kidnapped bodies when somebody died, and they cut them up. Ik denk getigen meisten met geschnitten Kerper, and man gedacht demonstraties against it. He lived through these demonstrations. And his wife is 8th generation Palestinian. It was 6th generation. His wife is 6th generation Palestinian, and they lived.
I know it's peacefully, you talk peacefully, and you are against violence. But how, this state of Israel, has to be collapsed or has to be removed? What instrument? What things people should do?
Yeah.
Especially people like you guys.
Rabbi Beck likes to say, wie soll Menschen darf teen, ze endigen the state of Israel.
Dus de größte Kuchen, en dus de größte Beine, das kann ich tun.
Aber sucht doch, was dit ja, sucht dit ja, mit dem
Was wir tun, wir werden sie nach wegen Zionism, die ganze Sache.
Wie mir geht raus auch.
Mir geht raus,
Die UN.
Ja, halt hineingehen auf Demonstrations. Und es macht, wir kennen Jiddisch, Deutsch.
Rabbi Beck says, what can I do more? He teaches, he's a prolific writer, many books, and constantly educating the Jewish community against Zionism. And we go out to, demonstrations. We go with Palestinians. We go out to the UN. We go out to different areas. We demonstrate. We speak up, and we hope that, like in South Africa, as you see, I always like to give this example, was a recognized nation in the United Nations, distinguished, and all the countries did business with them, what they exported. And the only way it was stopped because it was God's will, but at the end of the day, it was the grassroots. It was the people who kept on stubbornly standing up and telling their leaders that it's not right, this is not right, we should stop dealing with them, and eventually it ended. And today everybody agrees that it was racist, it was wrong, apartheid was wrong. But I was in South Africa. We went to visit Devil's Island. It's called we went to visit different places over there where they have recordings where you have their prime ministers and the ones who during the apartheid, where they're explaining why it's good for the black people, the apartheid. They explained that it's good for the communities of the black people, the apartheid, and it was accepted. They understood that this is the right way. And today, if you ask anybody, you take a child and you say, is it, and they'll say, and nobody will say that it's good. So and this is the state of Israel. It defies logic and that they call themselves a Jewish state is such a farce. It is so blatantly hypocritical. The reason that the Jews are in a danger, God forbid, it's because of Zionism, clearly. And if you dare, the European Union once made a study and they said there's a growing of anti-Zionism. They said no, they had to retract and call it anti-Semitism. And they said, oh yes, it's subconscious. Really underlying this is always anti-Semitic. They always ridicule if anybody says anti-Zionist, it's anti-Semitism. This could be resolved. Rabbi Beck always says he doesn't like to give. He's very reluctant. He says we don't have a solution, because if you're going to say that my solution is not right, then you'll say that maybe what my whole issue was wrong. And he wants to make it clear: Judaism and Zionism is diametric opposites, and there is nothing in the Jewish religion that to support this state of Israel. It's totally forbidden. And end of day. So the sickness is there. It's this cancer, this tumor. But how to resolve it? Obviously, the real resolution would be, with God's help, the speedy and dismantling and removal of the state. God help speedily and peacefully. But to give an advice how to do it, well, we can do what we do. What we're required to do is to speak up, to demonstrate, and ask, as we say, the grassroots, that people should become aware that it's wrong and not be intimidated. That we try to tell people, we urge the Arab and Muslim countries who will be seeing this, invite us. That they should have a clarity in the difference between Judaism and Zionism, so therefore people won't be intimidated when they're speaking up, that they're accused of being anti-Semitic. They're not anti-Semitic. They shouldn't be afraid to speak up, because they shouldn't be reluctant to speak, and they should have a clarity in that they should be able to face these Zionist representatives and say, we know who you are and we know where you're coming from, and you're not representing the Jewish people. They should have a basis on what to stand and not be constantly vilified in the national forums, in the United Nations, in the EU, that they're anti-Semitic and why shouldn't the Jews have a state. It should be clear that when they say why shouldn't the Jews have a state, they should be able to show these pictures of Rabbi Sonnenfeld of West in the 1920s, went to the King Hussein King Abdallah of Jordan, and he pleaded with them, and he showed him that he gave him a letter of loyalty and said, we don't want to harm you, we don't want to have
we don't hear about these
and then Rabbi Sonnenfeld and Rabbi Dushinsky went to the United Nations in 1947 pleading, we don't want this. And that, in other words, the Jewish community is suffering because of Zionism. We're the world community. So your job and the job of the people who hear this around the world is get the message out. And yes, we have to stand up.
So also, you believe all of the refugees, around, Palestinian, who live in exile right now, they have the right to return.
Of course, because again, it would be the removal of the state of Israel. This is ideally because it's their land. It's godly given. It was theirs.
So there is no state solution. There's one state solution.
That is, of course, ideally that every Jew who's true to the Torah knows that the state of Israel is forbidden. As Rabbi Beck was saying, around the world, there's the vast majority of religious Jews, are truly religious. They're all anti-Zionists. There are some who got conned. There are some religious Zionists, the settlers. That's why you always see the religious face of it, because the settlers, a lot of them are idealists, and they're gullible, and they're idealists, and they were taken into it. Mostly they don't come from religious families or from marginally religious families. That's why they were able to accept Zionism. The truly religious communities, as again, you can see it for yourself. You live in England, go to Stanford Hills. That's the most religious Jewish area. And there's door by door, there's mosque and a synagogue, and they're the ones who are religious. You don't see an Israeli flag there. Maybe in a handful, you can count in the whole area of Stanford Hills. That's the very religious Jewish community. Because why? Again, Judaism does not countenance Zionism. It's contradictory. So you'll find the very religious or anti-Zionists. Come to New York, you'll find the same thing. The most religious here, I'm sure you'll go to modern communities, you will find flags. But if you go to the very religious communities, there's no flags, no Israeli flags. So the point is, if you go around the world, the Zionism has no place amongst the Jewish community, and we have, if you would ask the Palestinian people, then it would be very, very, very possible that they would, and I'm sure, because again they've told us in the leadership, they have no problem with living together with Jews. Again, we have to give them restitution. They have to be rescued, and of course we have no problem of giving that they should take over the leadership because it's theirs. That's no question in Jewish.
Well, I think we covered all of what we wanted to talk about it, and I just want to thank you so much for having me in your home. Thank you very much, Rabbi Beck, and hopefully we're gonna see you in Jerusalem. And
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay.
Yeah, God help. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah,
you so much. Thank you.
احنا إلنا وطن مسلوب. أنا إلي بيت في عسقلان وإلي أرض، وهذا في يافا وهذا في غزة وهذا في أرضنا مسلوبة. فإحنا بنطلب حقنا، ما بنطلبش أكثر من حقنا. إحنا ما بنكره اليهود وبنقاتل اليهود لأنهم يهود. اليهود أهل دين وإحنا أهل دين. إحنا بنحب كل أهل الأديان. أخويا هذا اللي من أمي وأبويا اللي دينه مسلم، إذا أخذ بيتي وطردني منه أنا بقاتل أخويا، بقاتل ابن عمي إذا أخذ أرضي وبيتي وطردني. فلما اليهودي يأخذ أرضي وبيتي وطردني منها كمان أنا مستعد أقاتل. أنا ما بقاتل أمريكا ولا بريطانيا ولا دول أخرى، أنا كل الناس معهم بالسلام. بحب كل الناس وبحب الخير لكل الناس، كمان بحب الخير لليهود. واليهود عاشوا معنا طول حياتهم، عمرنا ما اعتدينا عليهم وعمرنا ما أسأنا لهم، وصلوا إلى مراتب عليا من الوزارات والحكم والأغنى. مين اللي بيعتدى عليهم؟ لكن هم لما ياخذوا أرضي وبطني وبيتي ويتشردوني منه، أنا عندي 4 مليون فلسطيني مشرد في الخارج. مين أحق تروح لوطنه؟ اللي جاي من روسيا اللي له 2000 سنة مبعد عنها، ولا اللي له 40 سنة طالع منها؟ مين أحق أن يعود إليه؟ إحنا ما بنكره اليهود، لكن بنقول لليهود أعطونا حقنا.